Germany built submarines that could travel further, dive deeper, and stay submerged longer than any underwater vessel before them. But the boats that wielded the most power were not always the ones with the thickest armor or the longest range. Power in the gray Atlantic waters of the Second World War was measured in tonnage sent to the bottom, in wolf packs coordinated across 1,000 miles of ocean, in the strategic leverage that a single submarine type could exert on the entire course of the war. The Type VIIC was the most technologically advanced submarine ever conceived by 1945, yet it never sank a single enemy vessel. The Type XIVC was smaller, slower, and obsolete by comparison. It destroyed more Allied shipping than any submarine class in history. This contradiction defines the underwater war Germany waged from 1939 to 1945. Innovation did not always equal effectiveness. Numbers mattered more than blueprints, and the submarines that changed the war were not necessarily the ones that survived to see peace. Before we go deeper into how these decisions changed the war forever, make sure to subscribe for more history that actually happened. Germany's submarine doctrine emerged from the wreckage of the First World War. The Treaty of Versailles had forbidden the Kriegsmarine from building or operating U-boats. For 16 years, German naval engineers worked in secret, designing hulls and propulsion systems in foreign shipyards under false names, testing torpedo guidance mechanisms in hidden Baltic facilities, training crews on leased Dutch submarines. By 1935, when Hitler publicly repudiated the treaty, the Kriegsmarine already possessed complete designs for 3 submarine types. The Type I was large and long-ranged, intended for distant operations. The Type II was a coastal boat, small and agile, and the Type VII was a medium-range combat submarine designed to operate in the North Atlantic and the approaches to the British Isles. These were not experimental vessels. They were production-ready warships, waiting only for steel and diesel engines. The strategic vision was clear. Germany could not match Britain's surface fleet, but submarines could strangle the island nation by cutting the convoy routes that brought food, fuel, and war material across the Atlantic. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, who would command the U-boat force throughout the war, calculated that Germany needed 300 operational submarines to bring Britain to its knees. He never received them. In September 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, Dönitz commanded 57 U-boats. 27 were small Type IIs, unsuited for Atlantic operations. Only 22 were ocean-going boats capable of sustained combat patrols. With these 22 submarines, Germany began the longest and most costly naval campaign in modern history. The Type VIIc became the backbone of that campaign. It measured 67 meters from bow to stern, displaced 769 tons on the surface, and carried a crew of 44 men packed into a pressure hull barely 6 meters wide. Its twin MAN diesel engines produced 3,200 horsepower, driving the boat to 17 knots on the surface. Submerged, running on electric motors and batteries, it could manage 7.5 knots for 90 minutes before the batteries drained to dangerous levels. The combat loadout included 14 torpedoes stored in the bow and stern compartments and in pressure-resistant cradles welded beneath the deck plates. 4 bow tubes and 1 stern tube could launch torpedoes in salvo, reloading by hand in the cramped forward compartment where men slept in shifts on bunks stacked 3 high. The Type VIIc was not comfortable. The interior reeked of diesel oil, unwashed bodies, battery acid, and the mold that grew on every surface in the perpetual dampness. Fresh water was rationed. Hot meals were rare. The toilet could not be flushed while submerged below 80 meters. Men lived like this for 8 weeks at a time, hunting convoys across the gray Atlantic swells. But the Type VIIC was reliable. Its pressure hull, constructed from riveted steel plates 22 millimeters thick, could survive dives to 180 meters, far deeper than its rated test depth. Its diesel engines, though loud and prone to breakdowns, could be repaired at sea with tools and spare parts carried in the bilge, and it could be built quickly. The modular construction system, developed by the Blohm und Voss shipyard in Hamburg, allowed sections of the hull to be fabricated in separate workshops and assembled in the final slipway. By 1942, a Type VIIC could be completed in 8 months. Between 1940 and 1945, German shipyards launched 568 Type VIICs. No other submarine class in history has ever been built in such numbers. This was Germany's underwater workhorse, the boat that carried the Battle of the Atlantic on its narrow steel shoulders. The Type IXC was built for a different kind of war. At 76.5 meters, it was nearly 10 meters longer than the VIIC, and displaced over 1,000 tons surfaced. Its range was more than double. With careful fuel management, a Type IXC could travel 11,000 nautical miles before returning to port, enough to reach the coast of South America, operate for weeks, and return without refueling. The increased size meant more torpedoes. 22 could be carried, compared to the CIC's 14. The deck gun was larger, a 10.5-centimeter cannon capable of sinking unarmed merchant ships without expending torpedoes. The crew numbered 48, 4 more than the VIIC, and they lived in slightly more spacious conditions. Slightly. The Type IXC was designed for distant operations, for hunting in the South Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, the Caribbean, and the Gulf of Mexico. These were waters beyond the reach of convoy escorts, where lone merchants and small groups of cargo vessels sailed without protection. A single Type IXC, operating off the coast of Brazil or South Africa, could disrupt shipping across an entire ocean zone. The British and American would be forced to extend their convoy system, stretching escort resources across thousands of additional miles, or accept mounting losses in distant waters. Both options were expensive. The Type IXC made the war global. It forced the Allies to patrol every ocean, not just the Atlantic. 154 Type IXCs were commissioned during the war. They accounted for hundreds of thousands of tons of Allied shipping sunk in waters far from the main convoy routes. But they paid a price. The Type IXC was slower to dive than the ZIC, its larger hull requiring more time to flood the ballast tanks. It was less maneuverable, submerged, and its long patrols, sometimes lasting 12 weeks, pushed crews to the edge of endurance. The psychological strain was as dangerous as enemy depth charges. Men returned from IXC patrols hollow-eyed and silent, aged beyond their years. The Type IXD2 took the concept of long-range operations to its logical extreme. At 87.5 meters, it was the longest U-boat class produced in significant numbers during the war. Its displacement reached over 1,700 tons submerged. Most remarkably, its range exceeded 31,000 nautical miles at 10 knots. This was enough to sail from Germany to the Indian Ocean, operate for months, and return without resupply. The IXD2 carried the same armament as the IXC, but its operational profile was entirely different. These boats were sent to hunt in the remotest waters of the war. They operated off the coast of East Africa, in the waters between India and Australia, and in the southern reaches of the Indian Ocean, where the Allies maintained tenuous supply lines to the Middle East and Asia. The distances were staggering. A Type IXD2 patrol might cover 25,000 miles, most of it spent in transit, to and from the operational area. Crews could be at sea for 5 months. The submarines carried fresh food in refrigerated compartments, a luxury unknown on the VIC, but even with refrigeration, vegetables rotted and meat spoiled after the first weeks. By the end of a patrol, crews subsisted on canned food, stale bread, and whatever fish could be caught during surface runs. The psychological isolation was profound. Radio contact with Germany was limited to brief, coded transmissions. For weeks at a time, a Type IXD2 crew might not know if Germany was winning or losing the war, if their families were alive or dead, if the submarine bases they left 5 months ago still stood. They hunted alone in empty oceans, far from the convoy battles of the North Atlantic. 29 Type IXD2s were commissioned. They sank dozens of ships in waters the Allies believed safe. But they also represented a strategic miscalculation. Germany was pouring resources into submarines designed to operate in distant theaters, when the decisive battle was being fought in the North Atlantic within easy reach of the Type VIIC. The IXD2 was powerful, but it was powerful in the wrong places. The Type XIV represented a different kind of power altogether. It carried no torpedoes. Its deck gun was removed to save weight. It displaced over 1,500 tons surfaced, but almost none of that displacement was weapons. The Type XIV was a supply submarine, nicknamed the Milchkuh, the milk cow. Its hull was packed with fuel tanks carrying 432 tons of diesel oil. It carried fresh food, spare parts, torpedoes, and even medical supplies. A single Type XIV could resupply 6 to 10 combat submarines at sea, extending their patrol endurance by weeks. The strategic logic was elegant. Instead of sending U-boats back to port after exhausting their torpedoes and fuel, the Milchkuh would meet them at designated mid-ocean rendezvous points, transfer supplies, and send them back into the hunt. The Type VIIC's operational range of 6,500 nautical miles could be effectively doubled. The Kriegsmarine commissioned 10 Type XIVs. For 2 years, they operated across the Atlantic, meeting combat U-boats in the empty waters between convoy routes. The system worked brilliantly until the Allies cracked the Enigma cipher. By mid-1943, British and American codebreakers could read German naval communications with only short delays. They knew where the Milchkuh rendezvous points were. Long-range aircraft and hunter-killer groups were dispatched to these coordinates. Between June and October 1943, all 10 Type XIVs were sunk. Not one survived the war. The destruction of the Milchkuhs marked a turning point. Without the supply submarines, combat U-boats were forced to return to port more frequently, spending less time on patrol and more time in transit. The operational advantage they had gained was erased. The Type XIV, for the brief time it existed, multiplied the effectiveness of Germany's submarine fleet. Its destruction divided that effectiveness in half. The Type VIIC was supposed to change everything. It was the electroboot, the electric boat, designed to operate almost entirely submerged. Every submarine before it had been, in truth, a surface vessel capable of diving to avoid detection. The Type XXI was a true submarine, built to fight underwater. Its battery capacity was triple that of the Type VIIC. Its electric motors could drive the boat at 17 knots submerged, faster underwater than most destroyers could manage on the surface. It could remain submerged for days using a snorkel, a retractable breathing tube that allowed the diesel engines to run while just below the surface, recharging batteries without fully surfacing. The hydraulic systems were revolutionary. Torpedo tube doors, diving planes, periscope hoists, all operated by hydraulic power instead of manual cranks. The 6 bow torpedo tubes could be loaded and fired in 20 minutes, a process that took hours on the VIIC. The hull was streamlined, every protrusion smoothed or eliminated, reducing hydrodynamic drag and making the boat nearly invisible to sonar when running silent. The Type XXI could dive to 280 meters, far beyond the reach of most depth charges. It was quieter than any previous U-boat. Rubberized hull coatings absorbed sonar pulses. The electric motors made almost no noise at low speeds. On paper, the Type XXI was invincible. 118 were commissioned. Only 2 ever sailed on combat patrols, and neither engaged the enemy. The Type XXI arrived too late. The first operational boat, U-2511, departed on patrol on April 30th, 1945, 8 days before Germany surrendered. Its commander, Captain Lieutenant Adalbert Schnee, later claimed he had stalked a British cruiser undetected, proving the boat's capabilities. But he never fired. The war ended. U-2511 surfaced and returned to port. The other combat patrol, by U-3008, likewise ended without contact. The Type XXI never sank a ship. But the Type XXI's power was not measured in tonnage destroyed. Its influence shaped submarine design for the next 40 years. After the war, the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union divided the surviving Type XXI's among themselves. American engineers studied U-2513, captured intact, and used its design principles to develop the Tang-class submarines, the first post-war American submarines optimized for underwater speed. The Soviet Union reverse-engineered the Type XXI into the VIIC class, producing over 200 submarines based on the German design. Britain incorporated Type XXI technologies into the Porpoise and Oberon classes. Every diesel-electric submarine built in the 1950s and 1960s owed a debt to the Type XXI. It was the prototype for modern submarine design, the bridge between the surface raiders of World War II and the silent hunters of the Cold War. Its power lay not in what it accomplished, but in what it proved possible. Had the Type XXI entered service in 1943 instead of 1945, the Battle of the Atlantic might have unfolded differently. Allied anti-submarine tactics depended on detecting U-boats on the surface, forcing them to dive, and holding them down with depth charges until they exhausted their batteries. The Type VIIC could remain underwater indefinitely. It was faster submerged than most escorts could manage on the surface. The hunter-killer groups that had devastated the U-boat fleet in 1943 and 1944 would have faced an enemy they could not catch and could barely detect. But the Type XXI came too late, and that lateness renders all speculation irrelevant. The 5 most powerful U-boats of World War II represented 5 different visions of submarine warfare. The Type VIIC was mass production, reliability, and tactical ubiquity. It was everywhere, all the time, in numbers that overwhelmed Allied defenses. Its power was collective. A single VIIC was dangerous. A wolf pack of 15 was catastrophic. The Type IXC was reach, the ability to project power into distant waters where the enemy believed himself safe. Its power was strategic surprise. The Type IXD2 was endurance, the capacity to operate for months without support in the most isolated reaches of the world's oceans. Its power was psychological, the knowledge that no sea lane was truly secure. The Type XIV was multiplication, the ability to keep other submarines in the fight longer, turning every combat U-boat into a more effective weapon. Its power was logistical, and the Type VIIC was the future, a glimpse of what submarines could become, a design so advanced that it defined an entire generation of post-war naval engineering. Its power was conceptual. None of these submarines won the war for Germany. By 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic had turned decisively against the U-boats. Improved radar, long-range aircraft, escort carriers, and the breaking of the Enigma codes gave the Allies an insurmountable advantage. U-boat losses climbed while Allied shipping losses fell. Of the 39,000 men who served in the U-boat force, 27,490 died. The casualty rate was 70%, the highest of any military branch in any nation during the war. The survivors returned to ports that no longer existed, to cities reduced to rubble, to a nation that had lost everything. The U-boats, for all their technological sophistication and tactical innovation, could not overcome the arithmetic of industrial warfare. Germany could not build submarines faster than the Allies could build cargo ships. Every U-boat required skilled labor, precision machinery, high-grade steel, and months of construction time. A Liberty ship could be welded together in 42 days. The Allies launched them faster than U-boats could sink them. By 1944, the mathematics were inescapable. The U-boat war was lost. But the legacy of these 5 submarine types endures. The Type VIIC demonstrated that numbers and reliability could outweigh sophistication. It was not the best submarine of the war, but it was good enough, and there were hundreds of them. That lesson shaped post-war military procurement for decades. The Type IXC and IXD2 proved that long-range submarines could project power globally, influencing distant theaters without direct engagement. Modern ballistic missile submarines owe their strategic doctrine to the IXC's operational philosophy. The Type XIV showed that logistics are force multipliers, that the ability to sustain operations at sea is as valuable as firepower. Every underway replenishment ship, every submarine tender, every forward-deployed logistics vessel traces its lineage to the Milchkuh concept, and the Type VIIC invented the modern submarine, the vessel designed to fight underwater rather than on the surface. Every nuclear and diesel-electric submarine since 1945 is a descendant of the Type VIIC. The irony is profound. Germany built these submarines to win a war. They failed. But in failing, they defined how naval warfare would be conducted for the next half-century. The technologies pioneered by the Type VIIC influenced submarine design on both sides of the Iron Curtain. The tactics developed by the Type VIIC wolf packs informed Soviet submarine doctrine throughout the Cold War. The strategic reach of the Type IXD2 presaged the global deployments of nuclear submarines in the 1960s and 1970s. The Type XIV's logistical concept was adopted by every major navy. Germany lost the war, but its submarines shaped the peace. The 5 most powerful U-boats of World War II were powerful in different ways. The VIIC because there were so many, the IXC because it could reach so far, the IXD2 because it could stay so long, the 14th Fourth because it made others stronger, the XTCUS because it imagined the future. None won the war. All changed what came after. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.